Okay, we are live. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome back, and thanks for bearing with us on a delayed fortnightly fast charge. It was fortnightly plus 1 week this time, but we're on a regular cadence again now. So happy May, and expect us every 2 weeks for as long as we can maintain that streak. You will notice we are joined by returning guest Darren Orange this week. Thanks for joining us, Darren, from the greater Chicago area. And I think that makes you our most repeat guest as of this visit. So it's number 3, I think. So welcome back, and thanks for bringing your Tesla observations at a time when it couldn't be more opportune.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And obviously we have Walter Schulze of the Network Architect channel and Eric Way of the News Coolum channel. So you can check us all out on the various channels that will be linked down below. And this is Coast-to-Coast EVs, your fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. Quick reminder, we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and a bunch of the other places that you'll find your audio-only version of this the day after. So yeah. Just if you missed this one for whatever reason, hopefully we'll do a good job of getting the audio in, and you can listen to it on your morning commute or your evening drive home. Okay, and in the news, anyone think of anything particularly burning in the news?
Anything happen?
Maybe the biggest industry-leading player shutting down half of its team. Yeah, it's hard to move beyond the news of Tesla cutting out its supercharging team. We have other bits and pieces here of Tesla news that we'll want to cover, but obviously the all of the oxygen in the room in the last 24 hours has been Tesla cutting 500 plus members of its supercharger team, the kind of shining light of what you would consider when you think of Tesla being able to get coast to coast, as our name suggests, and setting a benchmark for the industry. Really, that team is now seeking employment elsewhere. We will get on to a bunch of kind of what this means for the sector and hot takes for, we've got a little bit of time to digest it here, but there's still very, very fresh news. Walter, we decided you have a calming tone, so we're going to go to you for the first take on what's happened in the last 24 hours or so.
There's been criticism leveled at Elon Musk, and some of the reporting coming from The Independent, which cited a email, got blowback from him. A couple of people were unfollowed by him, and he cited that they were referencing a confidential source, and he didn't like them doing that, so he unfollowed them, which I respect. I mean, people shouldn't really be advertising internal emails and making reports on those, so I could respect that. What I don't respect, though, is the very blunt approach to layoffs in a large multinational company that's got tens of thousands of employees. Normally what happens in the automotive industry is when there's a decrease in labor coming, they'll start to propose early retirement benefits and buyouts and cease hiring and voluntary options. There's very rarely these blunt shut down an entire department swoops from upper level management in the automotive industry. So this is very uncharacteristic. In my opinion, the problem that you have with that, beyond obviously the situation that we could talk about with the electric vehicle support systems, is that the Tesla brand is going to have a hard time attracting talent when top talent are looking at places to work, and they recognize at any moment if they show up to Tesla on a Tuesday of any given week, they might be on their way out. And I've been in an environment where there's been mass layoffs, and what happens after that to the culture of the company is everyone starts to become very protective because they don't know when the next shoe is going to drop. And they become very nervous, and there's infighting and one-upmanship, and it really creates a much more toxic workplace in which to practice your craft, whatever that might be. So I think the more severe effect of what we're going to be experiencing is what used to be a brand that attracted top talent no longer able to do so. And really, an organization is only as strong as its employees. So I think the long-term effect of this, and there's many other long-term effects. Brandon Flash has been reporting about how the electrical utilities are now getting a little nervous about engaging with DC fast charging companies if Tesla is not answering their phone anymore, and they've already invested tens of thousands of dollars into power line builds, and all of a sudden they're left without anyone to call. I think the longest lasting effect here that we're going to be looking at is a pretty large shift in the corporate culture of Tesla and their ability to attract top talent. That seems to be now at an end.
Darren, as our resident Tesla driver, how did the news kind of hit you? What are your initial kind of thoughts on the developments?
Sure. So to backtrack, for those who don't know, my history comes from owning a Chevy Bolt EV for about 3.5 years and having road tripped and experienced that process driving from Chicago to Denver. But I just give some. I'm not just a Tesla only owner from an EV perspective. My takeaway from it is that it seems very drastic and sudden. There's probably a lot of things we don't know. And at the moment, they're still the most influential, I would say, charging network, probably is a fair statement based upon the NACS and everything else. It's not like their networks are shutting down. And frankly, we don't know. It's like less than a fraction of a percent, like 0.03% of their workforce they laid off. They have some 140,000 people. So while we perceive it as being significant, what I think is more scary is the fact that the rest of the industry is concerned they can't absorb. I've heard this the most, can't absorb these couple hundred people. Like, what is everyone else doing? They can't absorb them. My concern is more with the rest of the industry, and less with Tesla, because Tesla's decided, if Elon said, whoever you want to say did what, decided to get rid of these individuals, there's probably a very strategic decision there. And perhaps they've realized, kind of from my experience traveling to and from Florida, from Chicago, now over a year's period. So in 2023, and then again in 2024, a year apart from each other, we've gone from a definitive choice, like you have to stop kind of here, here, and here, to in less than a year, I can decide if I want to go to this one or go to that one pretty easily with 5 or 10 minute different skew. I don't know that more locations are going to help them as much as beefing up these locations. What I have seen is an increased density of the number of people at very opportune stops, especially at Buc-ee's, by the way, which is hilarious, but they need more charges at Buc-ee's. Makes sense, kind of. But I think that if the ambition based on what Elon said is to increase the density at the sites and to hopefully focus on the place everyone wants chargers at, right? Glacier National Park, things that are more obscure, not adding 2 more locations to a very densely populated area. I think that makes sense. Expand those locations in the densely populated areas. Don't add more locations. I think the more locations makes it infinitely more complicated. And then from a support vantage point, every time they add an additional location, my opinion has been that it takes a lot more effort to send people. Let's say it's a version 3 with 8 stalls, and you put 2 or 3 of those right throughout the year. You have to go to 2 or 3 different locations to support that. That takes way more effort and time, especially in densely populated areas. So while I understand the concern that it's a huge impact, if the goals are really to expand the existing locations and to focus on places like Glacier National Park or things like that are more just don't exist, fine, do that. Because realistically, as we continue to add more vehicles to NACS, we're going to need more sites. We're going to need a lot more, not sites, but more charging locations in one spot, right? So we're going to need more of that, more than we need like one every 30 miles, because that just becomes kind of, it's not like gas. If you're traveling with an electric car, it's not a gasoline car, right? So it's a different mentality a little bit. So it's not like you're going to stop at every exit. If you need to go 50 miles, you go 50 miles. When you go 100, you go 100, right? If you don't need to stop every 2 miles and find a gas station, that seems a little bit over the top. I think we generally can agree on that if you were traveling in a gasoline car, maybe you only really need one every 200 miles. The fact they're so ubiquitous, I don't think EVs need that either. But that's kind of my piece on it. I think it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. Right.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, there's a couple of pieces there that from what I've seen over the first 24 hours or so, it's only companies trying to soak up that talent. I mean, I haven't seen anybody saying they can't pull them in. They're all kind of, putting the feelers out there. It's mostly the kind of, just empathizing a little bit first of all. So some of it may be kind of playing violins and just getting attention, but I think there's more than enough companies out there that will soak up this talent. And from a Navy perspective, when you think about, the main criticism has been that they don't have enough people. They don't know how to kind of make this happen quickly because they don't have the talent and the expertise in site permitting and going through the rigmarole of getting sites on the map and in the planning stages. Now you've got 500 people who are ready to go now in that kind of field and have 5-8 years of bringing the most prominent network in North America to bear. So I think, I don't see a problem for those folks. I obviously empathize with losing your job at 3 a.m. on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning, whatever it ended up being, but I don't think they'll be struggling for employment. And then on the other side, I mean, Eric, what do you think? We've talked a lot about, obviously there are crunch points in the Supercharger network, and there are, like anywhere, there are places that have congestion, but those are probably fewer than the network as a whole, which probably has pretty low utilization rates nationwide. This doesn't disappear overnight, as we were saying. It's kind of, the network is still there. It's a question of one, expansion, how fast will they continue to put new places in the ground, and then the other side, maintenance, being able to upkeep what we already have.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm going back and forth between like fables and the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, but pick your poison. I think this quarter was, like, if we're being brutally honest, this quarter was the first time that Tesla has actually experienced a real loss, right? They were always overachieving. They were always hitting, beyond what was expected of them. And this quarter is the first time that they produced more cars than they sold, right? So they had a real loss there. And what my concern is for Tesla is, from Elon's perspective, did Rebecca and the Supercharger team kill their golden goose? Because up until this point, you could argue that the number one reason to buy a Tesla over any other EV that's on the market in the last year, 2 years, was access to the Supercharger network. If everybody's going to get access to the Supercharger network, now that's no longer a competitive advantage. And as other people have been pointing out, it's now just a cost center. It's now something that costs them money to maintain and provides them with no competitive sales advantage. So if Elon saw it from that perspective, then yeah, it makes perfect sense that they need to do that. And to Darren's point, I don't disagree. Right, we've seen the Superchargers expand to the point that they used to not have anywhere near the site count that they did. They used to be bested by EVgo and ChargePoint in terms of the number of charging sites in the United States. Now their sites were bigger, but they didn't have as many. Now they're literally twice as large as the next largest charging provider by site count in North America. So they've expanded. They're huge. But this is that sacred cow that I think a lot of Tesla owners don't want to acknowledge, but they need to, is that the Superchargers are behind the curve in terms of capability, right? If you look at the newer ChargePoint charging sites for Mercedes, you look at the newer EVgo sites in terms of power output, throughput, site design, full pull-throughs, canopies, things of that nature, 800-volt charging, sustainably being able to provide 300 to 400 to 500 kilowatts. They still haven't gotten their V4s in the ground yet. And so there's a lot of improvements that need to happen to the Supercharger sites. So if they're shifting gears from expansion to improvement, right, upgrades and improvements, that also does make sense, because they're no longer just catering to 400-volt Teslas with 65 or 60 or 50, I guess, in the short range models, kilowatt hour battery packs up to 100 kilowatt hour battery packs. Now they have their 120 plus kilowatt hour Cybertruck with 800 volt charging infrastructure that literally hits the thermal limit on a V3 supercharger after 10 minutes. They need to improve these sites even for their own vehicles, plus the fact that they're now opening to other vehicles. So, you know, each site is likely going to have to see a doubling of cabinets. And to Darren's point, maybe if you have 8, 12 charger sites, maybe they need to 16, 18, 20, 24 charger sites or bigger. So they need to expand and they need to improve the actual capability of the chargers themselves. And that's a very different mode than the build a charger wherever you can find a place to put a charger in. So their coverage is where it needs to be for the most part, probably 90-95% of the way. The capabilities of the chargers at this point is what needs to improve, even for their own lineup, right? Not just for the other cars that they're now accepting to use the superchargers. So it's a weird shift that, I mean, I can kind of see it. Now we've also heard other stories too about them giving up lease agreements, right? So they're actually probably going to start downsizing. And, you know, Walter, you know, shameless plug on your channel covering a lot of these charging providers, where you noted even EVgo, right? One of the oldest public charging providers is starting to see like reductions in their charging sites, even though they're expanding at really rapid paces. They're closing older 40, 50 kilowatt charging sites. They're giving up leases. They're losing access at older locations. Tesla has started to see that a little bit, but it sounds like that's going to happen a lot more, quickly moving forward, as they're going to start giving up a lot of these leases at these older locations, and maybe give up some of those aging sites and then just upgrade nearby sites that are already newer. So I just see this as a shift. It certainly isn't the rug being pulled out from anybody, but it's just, I think the current strategy for the superchargers, I think, changed, especially given they're moving to a public standard with accessibility for most EV owners, even outside of Tesla. And it is a cost center that's not really providing them a competitive advantage. So I think all of those factors are sort of coming together, coalescing into this shift from an expansion phase to an upgrade and improvement phase.
Let me, we've got everyone's initial take. Let me go to the comments here for a sec so we can get everyone's who's viewing their thoughts on it. So from Todd, we do hope that those let go from Tesla make their way into some other networks and improve for all. I think that is a fair point. I do think that there's a lot of this, you know, knowledge that was previously locked into one, kind of what people feared maybe become a monopoly for charging. I think that's clearly not going to be the case now, right? You're going to start to see all of the networks that we talk about week in, week out really start to say, well, not just for those people, those individuals bringing that institutional knowledge to bear on their networks, but they can see that as an opportunity to step through that door and start to take up the mantle of, you know, who is going to become the next nationwide network, who is going to become the kind of go-to travel network at least. But you have so many players, as we cover week in, week out, from state level networks to, you know, your truck stop chains, the OEMs starting to get into it. We haven't even got onto Iona, which Leonard has helped us onto here. That, you know, they will be quite competent, quite fast, deep pocketed, every, you know, wide swathe of 7 automakers now, but could become more, you know, if more who were kind of putting their eggs in Tesla's basket previously were, you know, starting to think, well, maybe they want to be a part of this, then you get even more funding potentially to really start to crank out those stations. It's been quiet for 3 or 4 months here, but this is kind of a, you know, if you wanted a perfect stage to kind of roll onto, this would be the place for them to start to make an announcement and swoop in, you know, over the hill as the cavalry. Big Barney says first they need to get funded by their sponsors. I'm not sure what that relates to, but maybe we can crack on further down.
That'd be the Iona crew actually opening
yeah,
versus
the actual stakeholders. Sure, yeah, I would think they're in the realm of being funded now and hiring teams. But Donald says, I was this close to buying a Tesla last night when I heard the Supercharger news. I don't know. I mean, would it, maybe we can take a break there for a sec and just kind of put it in the frame of, what does it do? We already had the kind of looming, specter of a lot of different vehicles being able to access the Supercharger network, albeit not all of it, obviously not V2s. There are some vagaries there, but essentially being able to get access to the largest charging network in the continent. So people had maybe a second thought about whether they could, now consider another model. What does this do in terms of if you were considering buying a Tesla because of the Supercharger network? Does it give you pause for thought? Do you start to just consider it as model to model? What are the qualities of the EV itself? Walter, what do you think on the vehicle and models it's trying to present and promote?
Yeah, so my personal opinion, looking at it very practically, the Tesla product is a solid EV. It's been the signal bearer in North America for EV adoption for quite some time. And the reason we're here, going back to what Eric said, is a stumble in Q1 earnings. That's why we're here with the Supercharger team getting dismissed. It was an unexpected downturn, which is being blamed on EV adoption waning temporarily or subsiding, I believe is the way it is. If you look at the numbers, though, I think it is more a faltering of Tesla as the leadership position faltering, and other players seem to be showing numbers that are improving. And I'll tell you one group that don't care. It's China. China, like honey badger, they don't care what's going on in North America. They're churning out low-cost EVs that are practical. The economics surrounding EV powertrains not only makes practical sense for consumers, if you look at it on a national level, being able to uncouple from foreign petroleum for energy and have domestically produced energy for transportation just makes strategic sense. And so they're driving the technology, and it's coming whether we like it or not. Whether Tesla stumbles or not, EV adoption, in my opinion, will continue one way or the other because the tech is compelling and it makes good consumer sense. So as you say, the number of models that are available is expanding. Every model year, we're getting more and more options for EVs, and it seems like hybrids are getting thrown in there much more now as well. But eventually the price of EVs is going to be low, and the practicality of being able to charge at home, if that's something that you can do, the reliability, the quiet drivetrain, the improved speed over internal combustion with the instant torque, all these things just make for a very compelling, better mousetrap experience that, if it costs less, doesn't make sense not to move towards. So EV adoption, in my opinion, is continuing one way or the other, whether or not the leader in the United States, Tesla, falters or not. Their numbers may improve, they may not improve, but the demand overall for EVs will continue, in my opinion.
So one of the Darren, I want to come to you because in the context perhaps of affordable electric vehicles, and Tesla started this kind of drive down in terms of pricing a little over a year ago, and benefited from it initially. It seems the Model Y went through the roof, one of the best selling vehicle globally last year certainly, and second only to the RAV4 in crossover SUVs last year in the States. How do you see the product roadmap or what they've got right now at the price point that it's at? What are you thinking in terms of its, is it still compelling? Is it still going to lead? This is just a temporary blip, or does this start to chip away at that kind of leading, sales and overall EV package that Tesla had kind of built up over a decade?
Yeah, I think the biggest change as of late has been the secondhand market. To be frank, the most shockingly, to be fair, like the price points are still relatively low. But if you're looking at like the cheapest cars in the U.S. right now, I believe even Alex on Autos did a view about the cheapest gasoline cars. Right, they're under $25,000. There aren't many. There's like 5 or 6 of them, and the average vehicle cost is still somewhere near $50,000. So a used Model 3, Model X, whatever, you're looking in the mid 20s to high 20s at, you know, worst case for some of the reasonable mileage. I think the thing is that what we're going to see continually is a mass surplus of used EVs to continue to hit the market. Those that can't afford a new car are going to buy a new car, and we're probably going to continue to see the trend of that every 2 to 4 years, them swapping out and that car being usually lower mileage, unless it's a rideshare vehicle, obviously, will become very inexpensive for most people and will have very low maintenance risks in most cases, especially for like the Model 3 and Model Y. It's certainly true across the board for like the Bolt, right? The Bolt's probably still at the top of the list, like what, $15,000, 12 grand for some of them with like 30,000 miles now. What maintenance is there to do on that car? Zero. So, and they get a $4,000 tax credit if they qualify. So, and it Tesla with a little more premium going to the mid 20s. And if you want to buy brand new, cash out of pocket around in the higher 30s, I think we're in a good position where the average gas car, frankly, is way more expensive nowadays. And very few gas cars are that inexpensive. So adoption will become inevitable. I think we still deal with some strange pushbacks just from like a weird view on EVs. People don't understand that you can plug it in at home still and wake up with a full battery. It's still a disconnect. You get home at 10 o'clock at night, plug it in, they don't get that. Once that becomes more understood, I know some people can't charge at home. Obviously, that's an issue as well, but I think that's the bigger disconnect. That's why we're seeing this kind of reduction in attack, because frankly, the number of used cars could be the impact of the purchasing new. We're going to see this balancing act here probably for a little bit until we have this, I don't want to call it a landslide, but, weighing one direction. I don't think it's going to be specific to any car, but I do think that the NACS adoption, like getting to the Tesla plug, is going to be critical, because I feel like a lot of the sales for most non-Teslas are being hindered by that, like in the back of your head thing that's going to happen next year where all these cars are going to suddenly have it. So I feel like we could have a huge explosion in 2025 in general, but that's just my opinion. So
actually, Darren, I'm going to have to rotate the tires on my car, so they're not maintenance free.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should watch your fluid too.
Check out
Yeah.
battery every 10,000 miles as well.
Yeah.
Just to get it to the landfill cost.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I was going to mention too, just to get back to that point about not buying a Tesla now with this news. That to me, I think is unnecessary. Take this for what it's worth, because it's coming from someone for whom the Supercharger network was never a determining factor of what I decided or not decided to buy. But if there's a Tesla that you like that meets your budget, like what Darren was talking about, especially if you're talking about some of the used Teslas, but even new, this news shouldn't impact that decision at all. It's not like the Superchargers are closing up shop and just going away. And even if they were, frankly, I don't know that would matter. Darren could even at some point speak to maybe his CCS upgrade, where you also have access to all of the public chargers, and this is maybe the core of that, Steve, that I think people also have missed, and we've been trying to explain it, I know, on this channel, and it just hasn't seemed to take. But the new standard, it really is universal in the sense that it is CCS protocols and language and the Tesla physical plug, right? So it's literally a mating of the two most common standards into a single unified standard that is truly universal. So it really doesn't matter what EV you buy at this point. Worst case scenario, you might need an adapter from time to time, but you are going to be able to charge at literally tens of thousands of chargers right now across the country, regardless of whether you buy a CCS1 EV or a Tesla standard EV, because all of it now rolling under J3400, SAE J3400. It is a truly universal standard. All the chargers that are in place are going to work with your car. There's really no reason for that to be your determining factor of what EV you buy. Buy the car that you want, that fits your needs, that fits your budget, that works for your life. You're going to be able to access chargers, whether it be the Superchargers, public chargers, or both.
Yeah, I think we can use that as an intersection here because I think we can bat this one away fairly quickly. But Artie, Penguin, one, Jacob, who we've had on the show before, has heard this kind of will they rethink the transition to J3400? Crazy Postman, whose channel we also love, kind of bats that back in the way that I think probably most of us would. J3400 lives without Tesla, superchargers or not. It's the standard. And I think that just speaks to your point, Eric, of, this is coming now. We need the standardization one way or another. And it's not that J3400 is not the Tesla supercharger network. It is anybody who decides to put that connector on their network, from BP Pulse, who's going to, use Tesla's hardware in a lot of locations potentially to charge point retrofitting, the CHAdeMO handles that were on the existing units to a J3400 plug. It's still going out there. We're still going to be able to use that network.
I do think, though, the term NACS should be retired because the organization which developed that term just no longer exists. J3400 is now a standard that we can use going forward. But I'm going to just stop using NACS out of respect to the people who are just no longer there.
Well, to be fair, Walter, even SAE does reference NACS, but when they blow out or explain that acronym, it's not a standard. It is North American Charging System. And so they're very clear in emphasizing that there is no NACS standard. It is a system that happens to incorporate all of the different standards that they've approved. So
yeah, just as a term that was coined, though, the people who did so are just no longer there, and they're moving on to other ventures. So.
It's also the acronym for the National Association of Convenience Stores.
There you go.
Comes up when you Google it. So,
but it was easier than J3400, I guess.
Well. And though, Darren, to that point, I've had a number of people have mentioned to me that, we're just going to be calling it a plug now.
That's fair.
It's an AC plug.
We don't
or a
have
DC
a name
plug.
for the fuel pump, right? I mean, we have standards of the grade of petroleum, but it's a pump.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're refueling your EV on DC or AC. It's a plug.
Let me jump back through the comments. I kind of leapt forward a little bit there. Leonard is thinking that Iona will be recommitting to building a massive network of Alpatronic chargers with a specific plan. I think we'll see news from them probably on at least initial locations and maybe early hardware vendors in the next couple of months. And again, I think, that certainly sets the stage for someone to make a big announcement. Probably worth noting, actually, Rivian, while we're on connectors, unveiled their, next generation, not really next generation, just a slightly larger, longer cable Rivian Adventure Network chargers a few days before all this kind of came out. It may have been last week, but they're still, for the moment, installing CCS1 handles. So there's a lot of pushback whenever any new site comes up and it's got, CCS1 only. How long is it going to take before we start getting NACS J3400 handles in there? I don't know if this changes any of that, but certainly even Rivian, who has committed and has the adapters going out there right now, doesn't seem to think it's a big deal that their next generation of hardware, which is going to be designed for that kind of opening up of the Adventure Network and the, the next installations that they put in, presumably at least later this year and early into next year, will still be shipping with CCS1 initially.
Well, and Steve, I feel like it's a catch-22 because no matter what, they're either going to have to upgrade their chargers with J3400, or if their cars are shipping with J3400, they're going to need to provide them with the CCS1 adapter. So it's again, pick your poison. Which one are you going to do? And likely it's going to be both, right? A slow upgrade to the J3400 plug at their sites, but regardless, they're going to be shipping adapters with their new EVs.
For sure. Let me keep tracking through the comments, make sure I keep up. Jed says, I don't think it was a strategic decision at all if you listen to Elon the last earnings call. That's kind of to Walter's point of, it's a cost-cutting measure and, you just had to go skeptical about it. I think there are potentially arguments about ways it could have been done, whether it needed to be all or nothing in the way that it was.
And I would just like to echo Eric's point that it was not a revenue generating cost center. It was really tied to a marketing ploy to suggest that ubiquity in EV charging makes long distance travel possible and easy. And that goal was accomplished. And also a private club for premium EV charging, which also no longer exists. So when you look at it from the C-suite, it kind of makes sense in that context.
So there's a follow-up comment there from Tom Palmer, all about the attempt to get his $55 billion payout. I don't know, Darren, what do you think about the motivation behind it? Is it purely cost-cutting and just bottom line stuff, or is this
I don't think that has anything to do with it. He might even be the primary driver. We really don't know. So he's just kind of the figurehead that gets all. We don't know all the inside workings. And we're never going to know the full details of the full truth. We can jump and guess and say, hey, he's a very big figurehead. He's definitely the person, you're going to point fingers at. And we know that he's the one speaking and saying all the things, but we don't really know the driving force. We think it's this or that. And frankly, after this conversation we've had so far, I'm kind of wondering if half of this is just a reaction to a mature state of the network. The network has reached a state of maturity. Perhaps it doesn't need that level of support anymore as far as growing it. It just needs to be developed as it is and expanded slightly, but does not require this massive group to accomplish this anymore.
It also needs a new mission. It was a Tesla closed circuit system, but if it's going to evolve to a public CPO, it needs to kind of reinvent itself a little bit. So, maybe this will be, as we look back 5 years from now, a pause point, which was a benefit because they'll start focusing more on amenities and canopies and things like that are more catered towards a wider audience of EV drivers. So.
Not shady backs of parking lots and strange places.
Yeah. So, as a moneymaker, I know it's never going to be their biggest, but we thought as we started to get to the adapters rolling out here and the potential for memberships to be signed up to, we'd spoken on, it was either the last episode or the one before, about the potential for Tesla to kind of dominate that space. The fact that coupled with the existing network plus what's coming and leading the NEVI rollouts, which is also in question now, they may have just cornered the market and be able to say, well, if you were picking one membership to have, and when you drive across the country, which network you're going to use, you may double down on the Supercharger network. And that starts to generate revenue from the membership fees, the energy sold, the visits to your site host, which is a whole nother piece. Obviously, Tesla doesn't make money for that, but it makes them a lot easier to sell on the prospect of, putting a Supercharger in. Is that money being left on the table, or is it just kind of, it's so inconsequential compared to selling cars and all the other stuff that they're doing?
I think it is. I listened to Dylan Loomis, Electrified host, this morning, and he was mentioning that the Supercharger is listed underneath other services on their balance sheet, and it's not even called out specifically. And other services is a very small portion of their overall revenue, and it's lumped in there with used car sales and insurance, and then the Supercharger network, and it's not a large revenue generating cost center, at least according to his reporting.
Well, and I guess it would depend on how you're recording that revenue, right? Because gross revenue, I'm sure the Superchargers beyond what we could even imagine, but when you take away the cost of operating it, that those margins aren't going to be very high if they're positive even at all. So.
And do you think anything factored in terms of, the stuff that Walter covers every week here? You've got the likes of Pilot Flying J putting prices up to, in some areas, 85 cents a kilowatt hour, just because this is what it costs. Presumably they've seen the demand charges going out and how much it costs to run these things, and they're saying, right, well, you'll pay for it. You're the one using the energy. But at least they have, these entities putting this stuff in and getting the grants and the federal money and everything have a associated business, right? They can sell the tchotchkes and they can bring people in, and that's, the main revenue generator for them. Tesla doesn't have that. It previously, to Walter's point, it sold Teslas potentially. If it's not going to do that anymore, then, lock it down where it is right now, it does the job. Only upgrade and install new ones where you really need it to keep the customer experience where it is.
I think it still sells the car regardless of it being. No, I think it's still huge. Like the experience, even if I can go the other direction. To Eric's wanting me to discuss this briefly, I'll discuss it. But having the access to CCS, adapting my 2019 car to support CCS plug, which it didn't come natively with. So I did the manual work with the bunch of wire thing and made it work. It wasn't very hard, to like 15 minutes. And I've used it once on a trip because weather was bad and I felt like we didn't know where we were going to go next because we couldn't travel any further. And we stopped at a Electrify America, gambled at this because I'm like, this is not going to, we'll see what happens. It's been a while. So we showed up to it and there was a bolt there charging, of course, at like 11 o'clock at night. I don't know why. We plugged in, another bolt shows up 5 minutes later. It's like, this is weird. I feel like I'm being stalked or something, but it obviously it worked, which was great. And there was no issues with it, but it's not something I would go out of my way for at this point. But it was convenient. I knew it was there. I already was aware of where these Electrify Americas are, because coming from a bolt, you're kind of pay attention to it, even though you're not planning on using it. But the same way, the other direction of it, if you're looking at it from like a use case vantage point, that's the biggest selling point. I go on my car, I push a couple buttons, and I'm gone. My phone even will tell me a route plan. I'm going to go into the car and say, I want to go here. What's this look like? I can find out in seconds with real-time metrics from my car. So I think that that's still a heavy selling point. The preconditioning just works. The silly things like even like dog mode that very few cars have work. There's a lot of things that the car offers and the network offers. It's just seamless with no adapters. It just kind of works. I don't want to make it sound like it's perfect. I've had a few weird instances, but usually it's been because of people who don't understand version 2 supercharged with split power, or a towing truck blocking half the superchargers for some reason. That's because someone's Tesla was dead. These are the only times I've dealt with a problem. So is it a selling point? For sure. It got me to try it, and I still have the car after almost 2 years. And that was the thing. Was it going to work? Was it going to make driving to like Florida and back easy? It's a big trip for us. Those kinds of things. Again, my gripe, I keep mentioning it already earlier, I can't go to Glacier National Park with it at the moment, but that's like the big joke, I think, on the internet. We still can't do this one thing. It's like, I'd like to do it too, but it's not something I'm going to do every day. And most people aren't with any EV probably. And maybe with the public network, it's possible. I think it helps a little bit, but still. So yeah, it does help sell it, but it's funny to think that just because some people have an adapter today, and I think we could talk about this, the adapter rollout's been slower than desirable too. That's not helping a lot of things, because I felt like personally at Ford, everyone should have had it in less than a month, and it's going to take till what, end of the year? I don't know. But
some Ford owners have been receiving an additional month delay in getting their Tesla adapter. So,
but it's it's starting to roll. I think the bigger piece of it, because we have obviously third-party adapters are out there, and we have the kind of caveats on those, but they work. People use them. It's going to be a reality. And Walter, you had covered recently. GM, I think today, is starting to release that. They've got the parts number for the adapter. It's only $25, something really light. Can you give us a little background on how you're seeing that rollout going, and how many GM vehicles may be kind of descending on the Supercharger network shortly here?
Yeah, great story. It was very interesting to see it unfold, because I was kind of curious. That I heard that GM was going to charge their customers for the adapter. I'm like, oh man, that kind of thing. What we are hearing is $25. That's what they're charging the customers. And I've confirmed that because I got a part number and I called my local dealer, and I got to the parts department and I gave them the part number and I said, is it true this is $25? They said yes. And so you give them your VIN and the part comes through the parts department. So that's below, I think, the cost of production when you consider all the shipping of these things around the country. The shipping alone, I'm pretty sure, is going to be in excess of $25 in order to get these things around. Some people have been reporting that when they placed their order, they were notified of a shipment date of Monday. And so I went on YouTube and started blabbering my mouth about how it's imminent that GM is going to be getting access to the Supercharger. And literally 8 hours later, in a stunning turn of events, you wake up and the whole Supercharger team just doesn't exist. So GM's on the phone trying to activate their Supercharger access, and there's no one on the other line. I'm not quite sure how this is going to pan out now, and I'm not sure if anyone does. I have heard just some posts on LinkedIn that people are having a hard time getting a response from literally anyone in the Supercharger network in order to do just about anything. So I do think it is confirmed that the employees that were on the inside of Tesla that were making the machinery operate no longer are sitting at their desks. So I'm not quite sure what the future holds for the additional OEMs and their timelines. According to the North American Charging Standard website on Tesla's sub website underneath Tesla's website, it says spring of 2024. So spring ends in the middle of June. I'm questioning whether or not that's still going to be valid. So I think there'll be a lot of GM customers holding adapters, but no one on the Tesla side in order to flip the switch.
I kind of bouncing around here, so apologies for anyone who kind of jumps in the middle, but there are some good questions that kind of pertain to this as we go along. So Brad Cook asks simply, what will Ford do now? Obviously, having led that kind of exodus to the Tesla connector and kind of been the champion for that and lauded for it. Eric, do you see this as kind of not a step backwards, but certainly a little bit of egg on their face, a little bit of trusting the wrong person at the wrong time, or is the overall long-term picture here just positive enough that it doesn't really matter?
Well, clearly Ford is going to have to fall back on the DC fast charging network that they paid for.
There's some good kit going in at Ford dealerships. So
yeah, I mean, really, like, yeah, I like I said, I don't know if I'm going to sound like a broken record saying this, but I feel like this is in a lot of ways just much ado about nothing, in the sense that nothing about the network itself is fundamentally changing, right? Like the hope is, and I think, and Darren, you had mentioned this too, some of those comments that maybe Elon had elucidated on this, right? The strategy behind it. But the hope is that what it actually results in is improved superchargers, right? In terms of reliability, in terms of upgrades, in terms of expansions. But it's just the growth of the network has probably stalled out. So like, I feel like if you're a Ford owner, you've gotten access now to still a semi-private network that's the largest individual charging network in North America. I don't see how this changes for anything, right? Like, I mean, if anything, I think Ford is maybe just counting their blessings that they got in as quickly and as early as they did, because to Walter's point, this might delay for the other automakers opening that access to the superchargers. So if anything, I think Ford should be patting themselves on the back for how quickly they got access to the adapters and are basically providing that additional service to their customers.
I mean, as someone who's at the back of the line, perhaps behind or ahead of Stellantis, but not anybody else, I'd simply say, like, I haven't, other than wanting to make videos about it and the general curiosity of how it will go with an adapter, it hasn't affected my travel plans at all. It wouldn't make any difference to me, as far as I know, on what we have planned currently, to get a Tesla supercharger adapter and have access to those V3s. It would make some redundancy into my travels, but you know, I mean, obviously the 800 volts is a piece of it, and only being able to get 97 kilowatts isn't fantastic, but it doesn't appeal to me in a way that I think that maybe certainly the Ford hubbub has been huge, and Rivian drivers have been quite excited to get in there and use it. It's not something that I've considered as I can't wait to get this, other than for the general curiosity of using the adapter and seeing how it compares to my other travel routes and using the public network.
But Steve, as we've established, you and I have just been exceptionally lucky in being able to travel and not fail completely because the public chargers let us down.
This is true. It's all us and Mike. Oh, and everyone else who's road tripped the CCS vehicle across the country 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. Yeah, but I personally agree with you. I think you and I are in a very similar situation where it's a nice to have, but it's not something that's going to change. Like, it's not a life-changing thing for us traveling.
Yeah, I guess the only kind of downside I would call out is that if people don't head to their, flock to that en masse now, as I had hoped they would do, then there's still the existing public charging network is still going to have the congestion, right? There's still nothing magically fixes that other than new stations opening up. And, the Supercharger network was one potential fix to that, where you click your fingers and with the adapters out there, that suddenly gives everyone access to tens of thousands more chargers than they previously had.
There'll still be ID4s waiting for you. I promise.
Free charging plans aren't run out yet.
It's almost over, right? Another couple months, I feel like.
Some of them, yeah. The Ioniq 5s still have another year or so, but at least we get out of there in 20, 30 minutes. So we're less of a burden. Harder to catch camping. Let's zero in on a really specific case study here, just as a kind of a place where we have a real congested supercharger. I know this one. I haven't actually been there, but I used to live in Brooklyn. So down at a Raymore and Flanagan's furniture store of all places in South Brooklyn, there's a Tesla supercharger, which is a hub for rideshare drivers. All kinds of people head down there. So this is potentially one where previously the trumpeting of the expansion of the supercharger network was a local focus. Like, we want it here. We need more of these hubs because, rideshare drivers are flocking to it. It's the most densely populated urban area in the country. And clearly here we have a local supercharger problem. So I have heard, I think this was reported on Electrek as well, that they've cancelled leases on some of those expansion sites. And this may be a good little microcosm for the whole kind of industry and what we're going to see happen, because I think in at least 1 or 2 of those, Revel, the rideshare company that has these 20, 30 stall charging hubs for its fleet and makes them available to the public, is going to step in and take 1 or 2 of those leases. Again, that's all speculation at the moment, just kind of inside people, saying what might happen. But if that's the case, you can see that playing out on a national stage in some locations, right? Because, where these places are kind of in high demand, and obviously there's going to be utilization, you're going to make money on that site. And it's hard to get land in general because people don't want to give up, the real estate or the parking spaces. Those could be places where your Ionas, we've always talked about, where are they going to go? Where's the location? The biggest challenge here is just getting the space and finding the right places. There's probably going to be some demand for these places that Tesla had considered expanding and now has kind of nixed a little bit. Anyone can jump in there. I just thought it was a nice kind of location.
Well, and that was the argument years ago, Steve, is that Tesla was going to dominate the charging landscape because they were taking out all the key locations and they were adding superchargers there. And it didn't necessarily turn out to be that way because they were picking the low-hanging fruit, but it turns out that they were identifying sites that already had high power drops, that the transformers were already in place. It was just easy to get in, put your chargers there, and it was low cost, and they didn't have wait times or anything else. It turns out that a lot of the other charging providers just ignored that and just added their own power drops, paid the additional cost. So Tesla didn't corner the market on locations initially like we thought they did. Like, there's this land grab, but the reality is, now that they've identified these locations, to your point, if they're not going to populate them, someone else does need to fill in that gap. And hopefully, like, I'm still a little bit sore about the funding in California that Tesla stranded, because that was a grant that can't be reallocated. So they took away 150 public charging stalls at 3 crucial locations in California, and now no one else can get that funding. That's a problem. With NEVI, I don't know. It's going to have to be reallocated if they don't want to take it. And in these cases, if they've done 50% of the work to get the power and the wiring in there, and then said, you know what, we're giving up our lease, that's just open. Yeah, that's an open invitation to any of these charging providers to fill in that gap, whether they get additional funding from NEVI or not. Half the work's already been done for you. Just build there.
I want to jump in with that. I think that's the thing. I think Tesla has decided that some of these sites, there's too many sites in a densely populated area, and I don't know. And I don't know that it's helping them sell more cars, right? A heavily used site that's abused by the same, let's say, several hundred or 1,000 cars over and over again for rideshare is not their market. It's not their goal. It's not helping them make any additional sales. So these markets where there's an overpopulation of sites, there's too many, that isn't actually adding to like more vehicles on the road for them. They don't want to support that because they want to sell more cars. So I think that could be part of it. Is they're much better off putting something in a remote location to help sell someone on, hey, you can go now travel here or do this. And they are like adding another location. It just, the onslaught of the least expensive car possibly purchased to go and do this thing, that's not going to help them. And then the maintenance on that, it's got to be in fact, I'm pretty sure it's way more, based on Chicago, it's way more intense to maintain a site that's basically full all the time. It's not a good thing. Same thing, back when we dealt with that winter issue, right? That site that went down, that's a heavily abused site. It's always got at least 6 cars out of the 8 stalls there, usually full, usually a wait time. Tesla doesn't want that. They want the ones that are transient, moving through, getting you from A to B. So it's, not abused, quickly utilized and appreciated and moved on from, not misused for like work or things like that, right? I mean, they're not in the position to like supply other businesses with a solution, I guess. They do that, but not like in their public infrastructure like this. It's not their ambition. So.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think we're going to start to see, where Tesla has focused now. It's going to be those travel locations, but there's going to be a massive opportunity, not just beyond these. I mean, Nevi is designed to kind of put travel locations in the ground initially, but a lot of the funding after that starts to go to community charging and potentially, I mean, wherever a state really needs it. So in that sense, you're probably going to see that open up to a lot of different providers, because again, to Darren's point, Tesla's not really going to want to be in there. It's not, they don't necessarily have the desire to go and figure out in a metro area, how people can charge. I think initially they've, over the years, they haven't shown that much interest in metro areas anyway, until kind of recently. I think there's been certainly around Metro Boston, there's been a big suburban kind of expansion in the last couple of years. But, perhaps that isn't really where they want to be. And maybe that's a piece of like, well, he said, well, they've built it out now. Let's let other people take up the reins. Maybe it is just as simple as that. Other people are starting to build. It's going to be on the J3400 standard. We can use them. Go have at it.
And in the specific case that you raised, Steve, I loved your video on gravity. I've watched it like 3 times. That is terrific technology. What they do is gravity doesn't try to pull in a massive transformer. Like I recently visited and stumbled across a 2000 kVA transformer, which took apparently 2 years to put on site. Gravity pulls the power from an entire block without putting in a transformer. They say the power is there. You don't need a big transformer. The power is already there. Just pull it from the whole block, and then you have all the power that you possibly need. And then they create a little microgrid with their switching equipment. They've really solved the problem of metropolitan DC fast charging deployments being able to be achievable in much shorter timeframes with some very next generation, next level technology. That is some very cool, sophisticated microgrid solutions that they have that are able to provide very high power without a massive transformer that takes 2-3 years in order to show up on site. So,
but it's very specifically a metro solution.
Metro, yes, very. Yeah, you can't put that out in the sticks. It's got to be inside a big city.
I'm also
cool.
I want to see 200, 300 kilowatt vehicles all charging at the same time to prove it can work first. I have my
BZ4X.
Yeah, he explained it really well, and as far as I could tell, I forgot the CEO's name. As far as I could tell, it sounds viable, and they seem to have a working solution where they just pull power from multiple different locations. They merge it all in their switchgear, and then they redistribute it back out. So,
what's your go-to phrase, Eric? Trust but verify.
Mm-hmm.
So I've heard that from you a bunch of times.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to go and verify, but I need about 10 other EGMP owners to help me out, or Hummer EVs. That'd be a hell of a video. Let's see. Cranking back. So again, we're just kind of rolling around the news here. So, there is no agenda today. It's just comments and what we want to talk about. There's plenty to keep us going for a little bit. Photogravity says there's a new installation that I saw put up in, let me not butcher this, Saint-Roch-des-Aulnay, Quebec. Somewhere around 18 Tesla chargers, all V3, surprised to say the least. And that's because he would hope the network providers don't start having J3400 cables until everyone with a CCS car is actually able to get an official adapter. I mean, V3 has been, I haven't seen that many V4 dispensers going out. They've certainly put those up in Maine without the V4 power cabinets. The V4 dispenser is kind of being touted as a solution for at least the short cables. But there's an underlying thing here of, you know, for a good long while there, whilst we all moaned about magic docks and lack of positioning, the ports being in the wrong place, and some of the potential issues with the Tesla, you know, using the Supercharger network with a non-Tesla vehicle, the answer was always like a drumbeat, like a knee-jerk reaction. V4's coming. V4 will be massively rolled out. Well, I mean, we know that now is not going to be the case, right? The expansion is, in general, across the board, you know, slowed down. V4, you know, to your point, Eric, not being able to even serve Cybertrucks necessarily at the moment properly. Where does that go? I mean, do we expect to see V4 kind of put on ice for a while here? Is it just going to be the V4 dispensers and the V3 power cabinets? What are you thinking in terms of tech at Tesla sites and what the new sites will hold? Happy to open that up to anybody who wants it.
So I actually think it's going to be it's going to harken an increase in the V4 deployment, or at least I think it's going to speed it up because, like I said, I feel like what we've seen is a shifting in the Supercharger team from an expansion-based team to an improvement and upgrade-based team. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these sites, what we start seeing is that new hardware going in there. And I mean, we've talked about this too before. Tesla is already kind of cutting it close in terms of getting their NEVI compliance with their chargers. The V4 dispensers, at least, meet the surface level requirements for California and for NEVI requirements. You get the back end electronics to actually support those standards, and then you're basically there. So I see this more as a chance for them to take these sites that already exist, start pulling out those aging V3 dispensers and start installing upgraded V4 dispensers, and then hopefully the upgraded cabinets behind them to allow for that average of about 150 kilowatt, maybe 180 kilowatt per stall of available power.
And how about Magic Dock? This place behind me here is the first, or at least one of the first Magic Dock locations in Massachusetts here. And they've actually opened up a place up on Cape Cod right at the end on Provincetown, which is a genuinely useful addition there, retrofitting I don't know if it's a new location or if they just added Magic Docks to one that was going in, but it's a genuinely useful one. There is no charging all the way up the Cape until you get to one of the kind of entryway cities. So that will be a genuinely useful place to add that in. Does Magic Dock continue to be a simple addition that they can pop in to these kind of useful sites in select locations? Or is that part of the chopping block as well? Not even going to consider it. Darren, what do you think?
I think it's going to get thrown out at this point, probably. I think that Eric's point here is a really good opinion, actually, that it makes more sense to install a full-blown V4 because it already has that built into it, apparently. So why modify or why update these older locations? And to complement that, I think that we will see is perhaps these sites with V3s be left as they are and add a V4 grouping to it, very similar to how they handled the V2 to V3 transition. There's really no reason to get rid of it. I've come across many locations driving from Chicago to Florida that have V2s full blown and V3s right next to them were added on after the fact. There's no reason to believe that some of these sites that have the V2s, why not remove that, put in the V4s there where there's only V3s, add V4s? Like, that makes a lot of sense, I think, in transition the technology away. So I think because the V4 is already supported, I think this is more of a test bed solution to see will it work? Can they learn from cars? They gain so much data from doing this. It's probably what's in the works will be in the works, but then what's not will probably go by the wayside is my expectation. I doubt we'll see many retrofits. It probably doesn't make sense from a cost vantage point to do that at this point either.
Well, and Darren, those upgrades should be more apparent, right? Because the differentiating between a V2 and a V3, about the only thing is that silver band around the cable, and
and it's
maybe the cable
thicker.
thickness.
Yeah.
So at least
the
with
silver band's the
V4,
dead yellow way.
yeah, at least with V4, it will be very obvious which chargers are which.
Monolithic versus the tiny little V3s. Yes. Very clear.
So traveling back to New Mexico with Jacob here, the other non-Tesla charging networks here in the US are really struggling, at least where he is in New Mexico. There's a big opportunity here, as we've suggested, to whether it's local markets or state level networks or whoever we kind of want to present as the potential to, step into the void here. To fill in what Tesla may be leaving on the table, slowing down that expansion. Let's shift into a more optimistic tone. Who do you see as benefiting from this the most, and who will you be watching closely over the next few months for announcements that kind of indicate they've seen this, they've reformulated plans, and their strategy is to really step into the breach and kind of position themselves to take advantage? Walter, you cover more networks than any of us. What do you think on that particular tip?
Well, my personal opinion is that the Tesla Supercharger networks era of prominence was coming to an end regardless, just because they're a single car company in 14th place globally, and 7 car companies, all in higher places, have combined in order to just focus on North America. So Iona was going to be eventually displacing them regardless. And people were arguing, well, it takes so long to get electricity from utilities and whatnot, but there's just so much money combined with those 7 car companies that eventually Tesla's was going to be unseated. So I think Iona I'm a little unsettled with the amount of silence coming from them and lack of any updates. So I don't really know what's going on there. I do know the Mercedes-Benz charging hub network has not seen any growth, which is Mercedes-Benz funded. So I don't know if Mercedes-Benz is pressing the pause button on funding DC fast charging, and as one of the members of Iona, if there's a collective agreement to put a push pin in this. So I don't know if that's going to be the saving grace in the short term, and nor do I think anything will. But I do think the capitalist forces that will be attracting EV drivers to retail properties, if you combine all those small players who are purchasing ChargePoint CPE 250s and ChargePoint Express Pluses and putting them on their property, if you combine all those, right now, that's the one that I see on the biggest upswing.
Eric, who are you hoping will step into the void here or really start to make hay while this sun doesn't shine?
Rivian. So I'm going to call it right now. Rivian is going to swoop in and hire a majority of the Supercharger team from Tesla that was just laid off, because Rivian wants to expand their network, and they're the ones that are in the most dire need of that level of expertise and that type of expertise. And the first project that they're going to do is build a charger that enables people to travel to Glacier National Park. That's
Darren,
it.
do you want to celebrate?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll take it once they open it up soon. I'm looking forward to that. Actually, I want to go check out a Rivian charger. I think it's actually going to be only because I've seen it. I've actually witnessed it. And I've never come across the Rivian charger yet, just happenstance. But I have come across Mercedes at this point, actually. Granted, that counters you'll slightly, Walter, but my experience has been different. So all of the Buc-ee's, ironically, that I've been to, both of them have Mercedes. They have wonderful either 2 or 3 bay with dual charging split power ports. So the 400, so they have that. Ironically, one of the Buc-ee's I stopped at might have had a wait time. We're concerned. And we're like, well, I think there's a Mercedes at this location. I think we saw it on the way down, and there was. We didn't need to use it, but it was there. There was one Polestar charging there, but it was there. And maybe that gives me some hope because I was frankly impressed with the install. Granted, it's charge point, but it was very clean. They redid all the concrete around it. Everything was perfectly done. I was impressed by the install. Granted, it was not massive, but it's still something. Rivian, I haven't come across yet, so I don't have a way to experience that from like, I would use this. This is an easy choice to go to. But yeah, I would agree. Secondarily, Rivian, because they seem like they're trying really hard now at this point. And if they open it up, then great. If they don't open it up, it is what it is. So I'm looking forward to not seeing any more Walmarts. I guess I'll say that.
Yeah, I think those are in the past for most of us now, but there'll still be, if you're traveling across country this year without an adapter, you might still need one. Might be a case for it in itself. I have to defend myself a little bit on. To be fair, I have free charging with Electrify America. Yeah, I don't love Electrify America. I visit. I'm quite happy to visit other purveyors of charging as they come up and do so semi regularly. So I'm not averse to paying out of my own pocket. I just I think my perspective on it comes that the network is there across not just Electrify America, who built one initially, but everybody who Walter has been covering in his weekly updates. Tesla, of course, tops that list quite often, but Electrify America has started to expand again. They are installing stations, even though their data entry sucks. ChargePoint is installing a lot of Express Plus stations, not just with Mercedes, but they're starting to go in at Ford dealerships. Places where you may not want to start, charge, but they definitely go into places where there has not been fast charging previously, and it provides an extra kind of buffer. The case in point in mid Massachusetts, where the original first Electrify America station has been a nightmare of rideshare drivers and full stalls. There's a Ford dealership with ChargePoint Express Plus stations just a little bit further down, and a Rivian station that Walter had kind of flagged going live a few probably weeks ago, maybe last month. So all of those would be options I would consider. If there's a charging station somewhere where I need it, I will go there. But the Tesla Supercharger network is usually a second or third choice because it's going to be less than 100 kilowatts for me. So I can get that. And in that situation, 2 paired CPE 250s do better for me than a Tesla Supercharger. So it's more based on power and dwell time than anything else, for me at least.
Well, and Steve, I think, not to speak for you too much, but I think you and I are kind of in that same boat where we were around traveling when Electrify America was really the only option that started to build in places no one else was building before. And then just one other thing to say about Electrify America is they are very likely in a very similar phase to what Tesla is with the Superchargers, where their build out funding is coming to a close. Mm-hmm. They're still not able to accept other outside funding yet. So they're going to end up probably in this sort of transition period where they're going to reemphasize upkeep, upgrades, maintenance, and improvements over expanding the actual network by site count. So we're likely to see both of those networks entering the same sort of different phase from the expansion phase that we saw before.
Yeah, it's got to come at some point, right? I mean, the first bit is natural that you need to, if you have any ambition of being a nationwide network, you need to cover some of the main routes. That's just it looks good on a map. But after that, you have to start to double down on, well, what does the nationwide picture look like? Because, you may not want to be across from another travel stop that has charging and is the only game in time, or maybe it does become a competitive advantage. I don't know, but there's going to be more and more mature network decisions to be taken as more and more players get into the space and we start to build out those other options, because Electrify America has been the only public option in most places until Tesla started opening up, until others started putting these things along travel routes. Let me see if there's anything else I missed here. Recharging is a bane on the network, should not be allowed on Nevi sites. Possibly, I'm not sure that Electrify America is in any position to software its way out of that, because I got a free session in the New York Nevi site, so it definitely happens, and they don't show any acumen to get out of it just yet.
Yeah, I get free charging at Nevi sites if I go to one of these. So
exactly, yeah, it's still going to be there as far as we know, right? Leonard says the GM drivers get free charging. Yeah, that's exactly what we're answering there.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, we should be clear too. It's free to the end user. It's not free to the automaker. So someone is paying that Nevi site for that usage. So.
It's coming out of the cost of the car.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. And that, again, these are going to phase out after a little while here, but it's still something that these networks, maybe they didn't all think about it. I mean, GM and Pilot Flying J being so close should probably have factored that in. I don't know, there's tons of GM vehicles out there with free charging, but Lyric's starting to pick up sales numbers, right? And those free charging plans are out there. So, I mean, it's just worth emphasizing again, Nevi isn't a network in any meaningful sense. It is a conglomeration of people who bid on sites and got some free federal money to build out their own pieces of network. So one Pilot Flying J you stop at will be potentially an Nevi site. The next one will have absolutely nothing to do with federal funding at all. Let's crank through the comments. Ron B, welcome. My opinion until there is ... Get automakers to support the Tesla plug, then back off and let others play for the network expansion. So is there a bit of a bait and switch there, you think? Do you think Jim Farley had the old switcheroo called on him? Not really, but
I still don't know what that NACS proposal really benefited Tesla. Like I'm still sort of struggling to see how it benefited them as a company. Like, we know how it benefited everybody else. We know how it benefited the overall market in terms of setting a universal standard. But in terms of what Tesla specifically got out of it, and maybe they didn't get what they were hoping they were going to get out of it. But right now, I'm still sort of trying to figure that out, looking at that new J3400 standard, what exactly the benefit was to Tesla. So...
let's keep cranking through here. Just some general sentiment on Francis. I can't even describe this. I just have to. It's for anyone listening to the audio version. Crazy Postman says Francis snick emoji.
Yeah, and he's right in the thick of it over there also.
We don't get the feeling that is a network that's going to come to our savior anytime soon, and expounds on that. I found a lady stranded at a Francis a few weeks ago in an Ioniq 5 because they won't update their stations to be 800 volt compatible. Okay, if I go west, I will note that.
And if you ever want to pick someone up, just head to a Francis station.
And I would note that EA gets a lot of flack for the reliability, but at least there's a phone number to call where someone could dial into the charger and reboot it or whatever. And Tesla, there is none. And I think at some point the non-Teslas that are showing up are going to run into problems, and they're just going to be stranded. And hopefully some kind soul will help them get to another place or something. I don't know, because they are more frequented. But the lack of phone numbers and the lack of ability to engage, well, there used to be a support system, now there's not even the support system, I think is eventually going to start to deteriorate the reliability high standard that they have at Superchargers once we have a flood of non-Teslas showing up. And also there's no back-end people there to provide the debugging necessary. It's a concern. This is a tough time to let go your support staff, right when you're getting a flood of non-Tesla EVs showing up to your stations.
And Darren, maybe you know this, but like say EA, you come across a charger that's broken. I can just submit a ticket in the app. Like what's the protocol if you show up at a Supercharger and you see a broken handle or a cut cable or something like that?
I haven't.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
so I don't know. I mean, I'm being honest with that. Like I've come across it, like where cables are just laying on the ground. Sometimes I found that with version 2s, it's there because it's cold, to be frank.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're hung over the top, saying they're broken. The car often tells you, honestly, often the car tells you a cable is down and it's not. It's fine. It's working. It's been the opposite experience. So I've had cases where a cable feels like it's derated, maybe. Then I've moved locations and it's been better, but that's been like, I can't remember when it last occurred, but it probably occurred once at least.
And I think that experience is similar to mine, but their analytics has been turning into a support structure that's able to replace those broken parts quickly, which no longer exists now.
Yeah, I'm just not clear on exactly how they escalate that.
If you have to try very hard to break their cable, from what I've seen. You have to literally cut it or like beat it. You have to be very mean to it. It seems like it's fragile from my experience, but it's not. I don't know. People have dropped them. You can throw them. I've seen terrible things happen to them, and they're fine. So,
well, and I guess maybe just to elucidate Walter's point, like I have the Tesla app, right? I'm just waiting for access on the Bolt EV. I don't know who or how I would escalate if I had an issue, right? Like other than maybe Tesla's internal analytics. And I mean, we know that Tesla is the best in terms of upkeeping their stations. Their turnaround time for maintenance, their turnaround time for repairs is, that's the gold standard. But
I would just send it. I would just use X, tag Tesla, make a post, say, hey, this is down. I mean, I don't want to
rate my charger.
It. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to trivialize it, but maybe it's a weird concern. I agree that it should be better than it is, but it just until it really becomes like, hey, this is a problem, I haven't encountered it. So I don't know.
We need stickers that say customer support and then just have Elon's X angle. So he starts saying
that being just his direct cell phone line. Send him a text. Hey, Elon, can you fix this?
Yeah. Or you can use that Elon jet tracker thing to figure out where he is and track him down.
I did come across a backed into version 2 Supercharger at a back end of what was it, a Dunkin' Donuts it's on the route from Chicago to Florida. And when we came back and used it again. It had been fixed like weeks later. So if that's anything to say, that's about the best example I could give. I mean, it still worked. People were charging at it, but it was obviously not okay. But it was fixed weeks later. So I don't know. Something is happening.
Yeah.
So we're pretty close here to the time limit, but we've gone this whole episode without talking about robo taxis and AI, which is the other piece of what a lot of Tesla commentators are kind of leaning into now, that the more wild assertions have been that we won't need any charging cables in the future because they're just going to use wireless charging and drive themselves to it. I don't really have any massive strong opinions on that, but does anyone kind of see an intersection between what we've discussed over the last hour and the plans of Tesla in the future going to more robo-taxi and autonomous driving, putting a lot of effort into that direction? Darren, you're kind of probably closer to FSD than the rest of us.
I have FSD, so I have full self-driving. I got the newest update to my knowledge this morning, 12.3.6 or whatever. I've already used it today. It's improved versus I had 12.3.3 before, but for those that know what all these numbers mean, the improvement is significant. So the biggest jump from 11.4.9 to 12, I had 12.1 or 12.2 or whatever it was, or 12.3, I think it was. It is markedly better. It can pretty much do close to 90, I would say 98%. I rarely disengage it. In fact, most of my experience disengaging it is occurring learning the update. so you kind of take it out for a drive, play around with it, know what it's going to do, learn its behavior. After you get used to it, you know what it's going to do. It becomes kind of predictable, and you kind of get used to it if it has little nuance here or there. But the new version is very organic. So you have to learn the organicness of it. And unfortunately, a lot of drivers are kind of weird, I've learned, as far as like what it's been trained on. So things I wouldn't do, the car does, but it's fine, but it's way more accurate at doing some of these weird things than I would be probably, or would do routinely. And it's been really good. So it can do, I should say. I like to drive my car, obviously, but like it can do probably 98% of the drives, and you can just take over when it, like at the very foot ends of everything. When I first got the upgrade to 12.3, the first jump to 12, it did drive me to a location and park itself in the parking lot in a parking space. It has not done that since, but I did have that crazy experience in the first time I tried it where it did do that. Would you use it driving a long distance trip? Oh, absolutely. You would be horrible to drive a car again in that way on a highway, bumper to bumper traffic in Chicagoland, all this stuff. It does everything. It's pretty good. I disengage probably once now, and like once at least probably every 20 or 30 miles. But if it's on a highway trip, probably not for an entire leg. I usually wouldn't, unless there's something crazy going on. So it's doing most of the driving. So.
And do you think it's going to be enough to kind of be a selling point in its own right? I mean, we've had, a lot of pushback on FSD before, but I have yours mirrors everything else I've heard, that it is a step above what people had been criticizing before.
It is. The 11 version was pretty terrible in comparison. This is way, way, way better. I think that if I were to get another Tesla, I probably would buy it, but it would have to have the monthly subscription. It just would be silly not to have it, kind of, from a safety perspective and use case. There's no doubt having it active and using it is clearly safer than not using it. That's the ultimate question and goal. Having it turned on, where you can pay attention to everything else, let it just do its thing, clearly safer.
And a big quality of life boost too.
Massive, yeah. Traffic in Chicago, bumper to bumper.
I was just thinking the Stevenson Expressway on a 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock on
not fun.
Nope.
Yeah, not fun. Even just this simple like local traffic, is awful. Or being stuck at like a train crossing, waiting for it to end, but not wanting to pay that much attention to it. Having it on when the train's gone, it goes when it needs to go, and you don't have to put it in park or any of this stuff. Simple things like that are huge quality of life improvements. Will it be a robo-taxi? Maybe in a year, probably. I don't know that I want to get rid of my steering wheel. I do have a performance Model 3. I like to drive the car sometimes, right? Sometimes you want to drive the car. I think that's true for most people. Those that don't want to drive a car may not own a car at some point, I guess, right? But those that like to drive a car are going to own it. Let it drive when they hate driving it. Drive it when they want to drive it. Have fun with it. That's kind of my take.
So Darren, is there any sort of geofencing or restrictions that?
No.
So I mean, and when I say restrictions, I know some people call this off-roading, but I mean, I just call them roads. So does it have to be paved? Do there have to be painted lines?
That's a great question.
Do there have to be lanes?
No. So
Okay.
right now we have an area where there used to be, but there used to be a suggestion of 2 lanes in Chicago. They have a parking lane, right? Sometimes in Chicago where they have a main lane, you drive in a parking lane. No one's supposed to park in this parking lane. And the car will often drive in that parking lane, even though it's not really a parking lane, but in theory it could be, if that makes any sense. But the car is smart enough to know that it can drive in that parking lane. If there's a car to the left of it, it will understand that could be 2 lanes, even though it's not 2 lanes with no divider. Coincidentally, in the past, I had a problem where the version 11 would freak out when the lane divider disappeared, and it was like 2 lanes. It didn't know what to do. It would just go crazy. This car just goes now just smoothly, and I have a right turn I take into the area where we live, and the right turn, it now takes perfectly. It's a one-way street. It used to go like clear to one side of the street and then come back to the middle. Now it's right down the middle. So as far as improvement goes, I don't know if that answers your question, but geofencing A to B, its biggest problem is navigation, actually.
Oh,
Navigation is so GPS navigation does control it to some degree. So if you tell it go A to B on a map, you may not want to go A to B, but the GPS may force it to go a stupid way that you wouldn't go. But it's not its fault. It's because the GPS, the Google Maps directions are stupid.
yeah. Well,
It's going to follow that. So
yeah, the navigation issue. But yeah, I will say that for me personally, though, I would be very, very concerned in some of my areas where there are no training wheels, no guide rails. So one wrong move because there's no painted lines and it's literally a 400-foot drop, and so on a fairly narrow road. So those sorts of things are things where I would have issues trusting. But as Steve, you told me, I said trust but verify. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious where Tesla says you can't go with this.
This is where you'd have to go through, like I would do, and experience it, and then be very attentive and watch what it's doing, and then learn. Like, is it going to do A or B? Once it's pretty consistent, it stays consistent usually, unless something crazy happens. I've had it dodge cardboard boxes, like tiny cardboard box in the middle of our alley, for example. It's driven around that. Like before, we just run it over. Like crazy things that are like shocking to me. It's missing and dodging stuff. Even I've had it's like almost like I thought it almost tried to like avoid a squirrel at this point too. Like just kind of move a little bit. Like I'm not sure, but it's doing some of these things you can't really. You just don't know what it's thinking. You got to kind of have that experience. Wish it would tell you I'm dodging a squirrel or a cardboard box, but it can't. Yeah. So
it's not full Johnny Cab yet.
No, not quite. But it can't do alleys. What bothers me is alleys. I really want it to drive into my alley. It won't do that because of GPS. I can't put a pin there. I can't make it go to my garage in my alley. It wants to go to my front door. So those are the things that are not its fault, but it could get improved upon. So sorry, Walter.
No. I was loving listening to someone who's actually using FSC. It's kind of rare to hear people who are actually using it like you are, and it's terrific firsthand knowledge. I think there's a bit of a legality concern concerning once you flash over to a driverless vehicle where it's full hands off, and Tesla's fielding quite a few lawsuits currently. So I think the first place we would actually see some kind of robotaxi take place would be the Las Vegas tunnels, where Teslas are used pretty routinely. And if there's not a driverless car in the Las Vegas tunnel yet, I think that would be like your first indication that this is actually coming, because there's no better use case than a tunnel that has like one lane in order to shuttle people from a hotel to a convention center for there to be a driverless taxi provided by Tesla. And I think that'll be the first indication that it's actually coming.
From the AI perspective, I think that they'll have to specifically train it in that environment, probably. Because no one usually does that in the real world. They'll probably have to specifically train to do that. Just a guess, an FSD just for the tunnels under Las Vegas. It'll be a secret sauce, perhaps, at some point. So.
Crazy postman adds, jokes on everybody else. Tesla fired the legal team. You can no longer sue them.
Well,
just had a blank ringtone when you call that. So again, tweet Elon. It's the only way.
And Walter, I think that's kind of what we're asking, right? Though, is seeing, is the technology going to outpace the legal and regulatory controls? Because it's very possible that these cars are going to be more capable, faster than the regulations are going to be able to keep up to authorize them. But you can't run a robo-taxi without getting licensed from the state or the DMV or whatever for that particular
Isn't that
state.
true for all AI? Like right now, AI is outpacing all legislation, all legalese far and away at this point. So the fact that Tesla's actually kind of catching up to the curve a little bit.
Yeah, I hear inside the Beltway they're even replacing all the lobbyists with AI scripting. So that's where we're getting all our laws now anyway. All right, I'm putting myself on mute.
Can't do any worse. How could it be any worse? I think we're up against time, and at least we crept in some FSD there. So thank you, Darren, for that. I'm glad we at least hit that, because that has been part of the conversation as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This was a little more fast and loose on the agenda than we usually go, which is saying something. But it definitely was a good one. I think it gave enough kind of topic for discussion. It'll be interesting weeks ahead. So. Battle in, take a look at the headlines and start to see who steps into the breach, and maybe we'll even have more headlines from Tesla.
And Steve, can we just close on the fact that I do not think this is gloom and doom? Like, I don't think. Yeah.
One thing we didn't point out was, all these people, I mean, they may go to other charging networks, but quite often what happens in this scenario is they go off and create some very interesting companies, JB Straubel, Redwood Materials. I don't remember how he left Tesla, but, that's going to potentially be one of the biggest pieces of, the circular economy going forward. So a lot of smart people go out and find some interesting roles and maybe even start up their own companies. So spread that talent wide and make it a little more, fertile ground. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you for everybody in the comments for sticking with us. Looks like we held on pretty long, so we appreciate you, and we will be back on our fortnightly cadence. So whatever that puts us at in 2 weeks' time, we'll see you there. Thanks a lot, everybody. Cheers.